sons are. That'll be done.
But you know how they found out that he did that? They had security.
Whatever. You do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Also, could I ask everyone to put your cell phones to silent mode so they don't go off during the service? Again, please turn your cell phones to silent mode. The funeral service is being conducted by Rabbi David Chapman from Congregation Beth Shalom in North.
We read in the book of Psalms, Karov Adonai V'nishbarei lev. God draws close to those that are brokenhearted. And we are here today among the brokenhearted as we mourn the loss, but also remember the good life lived by Zelik Shub, Zichrono Livracha. Our hearts break for his children, Arlen and Dimitri, along with Stacy and Kate, and his grandchildren, Courtney, Maya, and Aaron. We hold in our hearts today his beloved wife, Tamara, Tammy, Zichrono Livracha, his brother, William, Zichrono Livracha. We know that that circle of brokenhearted extends beyond even the immediate family to other relatives and friends and associates that he collected over his 84 years of life. All of us here today share in that brokenheartedness, and all of us will continue to support each other as the family moves through this period of grief. The opening monologue of Angels in America, one of my favorite plays, there's a character who's a rabbi who eulogizes an elderly Jew who started their life in the old country and made her way to America to escape persecution and start a new life for her family. The rabbi explains Such journeys as that are no longer conceivable. They no longer exist for our people. But each of us who lived after them, those born in America, and those who may have also been born overseas but who have spent the balance of their adult lives here in America, we carry those journeys in our bones. We carry them in our outlook. We carry them in our senses of humor. We carry them in our relationship to America, our feelings about this country. Sometimes we carry those journeys in our accents or our word choices or the ways we show love or the kinds of food we like to eat. Zelik took such a journey in his life. Not as a child, not sent off on a ship to America against his will, but as an adult, a husband, a father, a person with many ties and connections in his home country and with choice or some choice in the matter. Zelik, along with Tammy, looked around their world in the late 1970s as Jews in Soviet Russia, and they decided, at great sacrifice, at considerable risk, to take advantage of a changing world and to stake out a new life somewhere else. God willing, no one here today will have to make such a choice or such a journey. But many of us, including Zelik's family, carry journeys like that in our bones. Some of you will carry Zelik's journey and Tammy's journey in your bones for the rest of your life, and you will pass some trace of it on to your children and their children, and on through the generations. But Zelik was more than an idea, of course. He was a person. He was, as we mentioned, the husband of Tammy, the father of Arlen and Dimitri, the father-in-law of Stacy and Kate, the grandfather of Courtney, Maya, and Aaron. He was a son, a brother, a grandson, including to many relatives, such as his grandfather, Aaron's namesake, who were murdered by the Nazis during World War II. And Zelik was other things as well, as we will hear. He was an engineer. He was a great conversationalist, or perhaps a great debater would be a better way to put it. He was an investor. He was a news radio junkie. He was an early adopter of the spreadsheet. He was a joker and a jokester. He was an amateur genealogist. He was an extremely hard worker, and he was a proud link in this chain, this great story of the Jewish people. Although he may not have always been the fuzziest or the most demonstrative person, he was a family man, a patriarch, a pop. So it is only appropriate that we hear some words from those people who were lucky enough to be included in his family. We'll hear first from his son Arlen and then Dimitri.
Thank you, Rabbi. You covered the things that I felt I didn't have time to cover. You did it very well. And thank you to everyone here, obviously, and to everyone watching on the live stream. Unfortunately, not many of Dad's friends are able to make it. We have a couple, but it's kind of a sign of the times. Generation, as they got older, the circle got smaller. I mean, certainly Mom passing was a big change for him, but also just not being able to have the FaceTime with friends that he used to was also something that affected him in the later years. Those who knew him well know the story Rabbi was talking about, so I'm going to skip those things and just talk a little bit about what it was like the last few years. As I said, Mom passed about 6 years ago, and after that is when Dad and I really became close. It was during my teenage years, my college years. I was still living with our family. Dad was working out in the field, spending most weekdays away from home. Weekends were his time for recharging, and we remember his napping being a favorite pastime. that stayed with him throughout. I remember being interested in everything else, not spending time with family at that time. And after I moved out, there would be family get-togethers, holidays, birthdays, life milestones that we spent together. But one-on-one time with Dad was kind of rare. Mom was the center and the most irreplaceable part of his life. She took care of the home and of him, and he was the provider. And losing her left a huge void, both in having a partner to talk to and in taking care of just daily life things. But to Dad's credit, he persevered at all the home tasks and continued to find meaning in life, in other relationships, and in his hobbies. The phone and Skype became his lifeline. He leaned into his friends and family as his day-to-day sounding board. Talking was absolutely one of his favorite pastimes, and not just talking, but having deep conversations with those who would engage with him in his favorite topics like politics, history, investing, anything to do with his homeland, what others were working on in their lives. On all these topics, he could talk and debate and give advice for hours. And for me too. There were no quick calls with Dad. When the phone would ring and his number would show up, I would look up and say to myself, here we go. And even though many times he would purposely take the opposite point of view from the person he was engaged with in conversation, including me, it was just his way of expressing his dry humor and enjoying the time together. Within a year of Mom's passing, I changed careers and my time became more flexible. So Dad and I came up with a weekly routine. Tuesdays were our lunch dates. I would go over to his place. Sometimes there would be a list of to-dos and fixes around his apartment to take care of. He did not like to get his hands dirty. That was one of his things. But being an engineer, he would always know what needed to be done and how it needed to be done. He just needed me to do those things. For our lunches, he prepared the food. Meals consisted of soup, salad, cold cuts, fruit, and always something sweet. The menu rarely changed, except for soups, which were usually different. He experimented in the kitchen, aiming to recreate the taste he remembered from either Mom's cooking, or his mom's cooking, or even his grandma's cooking. He was a real foodie, which is something I didn't know early on, or didn't realize. In his experience, American food just didn't taste right, whether it was made in a restaurant or bought pre-made in a store. As he would say, it took the taste out of it. So he would do what he could to find things in international stores or cook the food that he enjoyed himself. Before leaving our lunches, two things would usually happen. One, he would find things to talk about as I was getting dressed, so leaving was never a quick thing. And when I would finally ask if I should bring anything next time, so that he didn't have to do all the work each time, he would smile and he would say, just bring yourself. Around the beginning of the year, as with many other things, his kitchen experiments became less interesting for him. We still got together, but the soups were more often store-bought, and the taste of things he always enjoyed also started to lose their flavor. It was just one of the signs that his body was changing as his health declining. That said, he did have his favorite fast foods. So Tuesdays started to include doctor appointments and procedures. We would often find ourselves eating out those days. His favorites included McDonald's fries, which was hard to find because it became seasonal. He liked Portillo's hugs, Arby's sandwiches and curly fries, Panera's onion soup, big favorite, which was actually, onion soup became our say cheese when we would take pictures. That was a fun little family tradition. And for some reason he liked, of all the pizzas, he liked Little Caesar's pizza, which I never understood. Chinese food was also a favorite, but not an easy choice. He had a memory of eating some noodles in a sauce that he really enjoyed, but neither he nor I were able to find it anywhere locally. Dimitri thinks it was something that he had in Chinatown many years ago. But we did strike gold with wonton soup. That seemed to always taste right to him, and it was the dish he enjoyed the most, and most frequently with me, kind of in his final weeks. If I have to pass along one thing that will stay with me about our relationship is trust. For someone who was very intellectual, had ideas about how everything should work, right and wrong, good and bad, when he finally felt that he would not be able to do everything for himself, he put a lot of trust in me to help him. And this was a big change for me because I always saw Dad as someone who could handle anything. It was one thing to ask me to fix a faucet. It was something else entirely to help him make medical decisions, take over his finances, schedule his appointments, manage his medicines, and eventually make life decisions. And these are not unique things. People do these things for loved ones all the time. But for me, this was probably the biggest responsibility I have ever felt. Taking into account being married and having 2 children. Maybe because it was so intense for over a year. And doing right by him, finding him help quickly when he needed it, fighting through all sorts of red tape and obstacles were pretty common this past year. And while I may have been on the front line most often, the support I had from Stacy, Dimitri, and Kate, for all the big decisions and a ton of little ones, kept me sane. And I really think we did right by him. I have no regrets. Courtney, Maya, Aaron, Grandpa loved you. He asked about you just about every time we were together, and I did my best to answer his questions. I asked him to call you. Please keep him in your memories. Richard, thanks for all your support and the information. Maybe we can have our lunch now. And Stacy, you've been known to remind me quite frequently of the traits I share with my father. Like saying weird things just to get a reaction out of you or the girls, making jokes about things that shouldn't be joked about, and of course eating food that smelled bad. Our life will calm down. I don't think I will be changing though. So, at least in our home, Pop will live on, and you'll just have to continue making lemonade out of this lemon, which came from this lemon tree.
That's what I'm supposed to follow that, huh? Lemon from the lemon tree, very nice. How long did it take to come up with it? A couple days? Or is that extended? Just a couple days. Very nice, very nice. So again, many thanks to all family and friends that have come out, everybody's that's watching online, to honor my dad's memory. You know, I tried to give some thought about how things would go today. What would I think about, you know, how would I feel? What stories would I tell? When chatting with Rabbi David the other day, he was so kind to remind us that it is difficult to capture the entire arc of somebody's life in just a few phrases, especially somebody like my dad who lived to 84 years of age. On a grander scale, right, the book of life is filled many verses, many chapters, most of which are still unwritten, right? Well, I knew very much that what I wanted to do was add both chapter and verse to my dad's experience for this greater story. But how? How was I going to do it? Trying to give body and form to a person's legacy is pretty heady stuff, right? I think we would all agree, right? As a matter of fact, I wasn't even so sure that that would even be the type of thing that my dad would want in memorializing his life. He was many things, including being a pretty modest guy, not much of a showboater. I don't think I ever saw his end zone dance. But that's not to say that he wasn't kinetic. If anything, this idea of movement and journey is, it was a theme, a recurring theme in his life. And it's a big part of how I'm likely to remember him. There were many journeys. Rabbi David touched on some of these. As a toddler, he and his family were evacuated from a small town in Belarus during the invasion by the Nazis in World War II. As a young man, he left home to attend university in Leningrad, a sprawling metropolis of almost 5 million people at the time. That must have been very different from somebody from a small town. Later, during the midst of the Cold War, his country called him to mandatory military service, and he found himself on the western shores of the Soviet Union, on the Sea of Japan, 10,000 kilometers from home, and a new family. He'd been married. Arlen was just born. It's quite a journey. Now look, our family has an immigrant story, like many. And for my mom, in partnership with her, by the way, I'm gonna pause here for a moment. You said he was a foodie, not the greatest cook, not the best in the kitchen. Reminds me of a story. His first day when he moved into his senior living, independent living facility, the man managed to take an electric tea kettle, which you just plug in, and he managed to set it on fire in his electric range. Mom, please help him, please. He needs the help. So that was his first day. But look, when it was time for a new journey, he was able to do it with Mom, a great partner, a great spouse. Together, with Arlen and I, left behind a family, the only life they had known up until that point, and they left as dissidents to America. This must have taken great courage and a willingness to simply journey forth. Heck, could it have been any worse than the life that they were leaving behind? This was the late 70s. We as a family unit, we arrived in New York City, the metropolis. It was only shortly after that he was ready to journey onward again, this time to Chicago, on his own, to set up a future for us in Rogers Park. And so here we'll take just a brief pause. So, new job, new city, new life, and a lot of work to do, frankly. He worked hard. He made it a point to do what he needed to do to provide for his family. And although we had settled, there was actually a little more movement ahead, but a different kind of movement, though. And for me, this new kind of movement would be foundational for how I relate with my dad. So as a little guy, I remember there were so many trips to the park and to the lakefront. In the neighborhood for us, we were in East Rogers Park, our home base was Warren Park. Now, there were plenty of other trips to the Northwestern campus in Evanston, and in both cases, there were lots of walks. Walks with my mom, walks with my dad. Arlen, I gotta be honest, I don't remember you being there. I really don't. I gotta imagine you were there. The photographic evidence says say you were there. Memory's a little fuzzy. It was at Warren Park that I recall my dad helping me learn to ride a bike. He was at my side, smiling, happy to offer a steadying hand. Sometimes he'd be on my side, sometimes behind, sometimes a little bit ahead, but ever present. There's got to be a little bit of metaphor in there, right? These trips to the park and the walks, they must have been a great escape for him from the daily grind of work. I certainly had a lot of fun there. And I later gained a further appreciation for the time we can spend with our kids at the park, especially at Warren Park, with all the bike rides that Aaron and I have taken there over the years. A lot of pandemic rides, right, buddy? Yeah. When I was a bit older, and we were now living in West Rogers Park, I had taken up an interest in comic books. This must have been 85, 86, 87. There was a comic book shop located at Devon and McCormick. just a few blocks from where we lived. On Saturdays, when Mom would be at work and Pop was at home, apparently done with overtime for the week, he'd take a nap early in the afternoon. In the late afternoon, oftentimes we would go for a walk together to the comic book shop. Now mind you, he could care less about Spider-Man or Batman or Captain America or the X-Men. I don't think he ever knew who any of them were. But he was always game for a walk together. And I always enjoyed those walks with my dad, these little journeys through the neighborhood together. Now later, that same comic book shop moved. They moved all the way to Bryn Mawr in Kimball. And as a kid, it seemed like it was about 1,000,000 miles away. Now, interestingly enough, when I suggested to my dad that we continue our regular trips, our walks to the comic book shop, even though it was much further away, he never balked. He was happy to get outside, and I was happy to have a chance for a nice long walk with him, side by side, chatting with my dad as we go to and fro. Later, my parents moved to Des Plaines, and when they settled in there, they made it a point to include outside time in their regular routines. But now it wasn't Warren Park, it was Lake Park in Des Plaines. Thank you, Lake Park, Des Plaines Park District. There, they would walk the semi-loop, they would enjoy the water, the trees, and the ducks. When Aaron arrived, we'd soon join them in Lake Park on those walks. Now it'd be Kate and Aaron and myself, now with Nana and Mom. Oftentimes on those trips around the lake, I'd hang back just a little bit to walk side by side with my dad and chat. A habit, I guess. When Mom passed, Pop kept up his regular walks around Lake Park. A bit of exercise was good. Frankly, he had some health issues at the time. Surgery, in fact, required to repair a part of his aorta. Now, let me be clear. There was a history of walks with my dad. Just walks, not runs. But I do remember seeing him run one time. Just once. And it was actually after the aorta surgery. We were at Lake Park. My dad, Kate, Aaron. Aaron was probably 5 or 6 at the time. And Aaron was playing in the grass, running around a little bit, and I look over, and my dad takes off in a full sprint to catch up with Aaron and have a laugh and a giggle. Quite a journey, although, albeit a short one, but one inspired, I think, by youth. Thanks for being there to inspire me that day. Now, as my dad began to slow down, we still made it a point to meet up at Lake Park, go for a stroll, have a chat, catch up. Walking with my dad seemed to be a constant in our relationship. These little sojourns, these walks, our walks together. Now, look, they may not have been as dramatic as some of the other journeys that he had in his life. Matter of fact, I describe these as steady, measured, maybe even a little bit meditative or thoughtful. In fact, I would go so far as to say that those walks with my dad were very much like him. So I miss you, Pop, and I'll miss the countless walks that we've been on together, but they will stand as a lasting memory for me. So now that you've reached the end of your journey, may you rest in peace with Mom forever. Amen.
Thank you, Arla and Dimitri, for those beautiful remembrances of your dad. Please join me in your program booklet as we read together in English the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We sometimes question why this psalm, the 23rd psalm, was chosen out of all of the Tehillim in the Hebrew Bible to be associated with moments like this, moments of loss, moments of remembrance, moments of grief. And I think it has something to do with the sense that we get in the psalm that every life has peaks and valleys. Every life has moments of feeling close in God's presence, and maybe moments of feeling like we're walking in the valley of the shadow of death. And certainly Zelik's life had peaks and valleys. It had accomplishments and challenges, things that felt like blessings and things that felt like obstacles. But on balance, we hope and we pray the memories that his sons shared and memories that I know many of you hold, that on balance, it was a life in which the cup of blessing overflowed. Kosi rivaya, the cup overflows. A life where the blessings of meaningful work, community, family, a sense of purpose, a sense of accomplishment, laughter, debate, radio, all of those little things that made him experience joy, brought that blessing up to the edge of the cup and maybe even to overflow. You mentioned the gifts that he's left you, the legacy that he leaves behind. One of the ways that we see that legacy play out is in this sense of hard work, of work ethic. Imagine, as Dimitri described, coming here with nothing, coming here with no money, no citizenship, no job, not even family heirlooms that could be sold, only having English because of underground classes he took back in the Soviet Union, an activity for which he almost faced arrest, terrifying his wife. But despite those setbacks, he built a new support system here. First, as we heard, in Sheepshead Bay, and then later in Chicago, essentially from scratch. He did rely on charitable organizations like HIAS at the beginning, but before long he found enough success here in his adopted home that he could actually become a benefactor of HIAS and other organizations. Imagine that, going from being the recipient of services to someone who can provide for somebody else who's in need. He even sent money, and I heard even a camcorder, back to relatives in Russia. He may not have brought heirlooms with him, but he did bring a deep-set and well-earned skepticism about life, which I think also served him well. And again, we can relate. Think about those peaks and valleys in Psalm 23. Once you've had your whole life ripped out from under you, you can't really blame someone for not always trusting the government. My favorite example that the family shared with me of that, you would think that once somebody arrives here in the United States in a democracy, they would be first in line to vote every free election that they possibly could, but rather, after having participated in sham elections for most of his life, what Zelik relished here in the United States was the freedom to not vote. The American system, he may not have embraced voting and democracy, but as we learned, he certainly embraced the American system of capitalism. His work ethic was unparalleled. He succeeded in the Soviet Union despite the anti-Semitic quotas that limited his success, but he continued to work hard here in the US, and that work paid off. He earned enough to provide a comfortable and loving home for his family. He was able to navigate the system enough to invest in a co-op in the 80s and take his family on vacations, and to remain an active and avid investor until his final years. And even more he gave back, because he and Tammy were in among the first waves of Soviet Jewish immigrants to arrive here. By the time the curtain fell about 10 years later, they were experts in navigating America as immigrant Soviet Jews, and they became community leaders. They hosted the annual New Year's party, which was a major event in that community, and they became pillars of that particular sub-community, new arrivals in this melting pot of Rogers Park. They were able to pay it forward. What a blessing for them to be able to do. We know that Zelik will be remembered. He'll be remembered in all of the large and small ways that his sons shared. He'll be remembered anytime you find yourself working hard to achieve something, or stopping to take a break, to have a meaningful debate about the news. Every time you hear the WBBM logo, slogan, jingle, that's the word I'm looking for, the jingle. Every time you appreciate a little piece of your history, your legacy, those journeys that we all emerged from and that we carry with us in our bones. Those are moments that Zelik will be remembered. And in that sense, truly, as both of you said, he is not gone. His legacy lives on in your lives and the lives of his grandchildren and everyone else who knew him and loved him. Yehi zichro baruch, may Zelik's memory continue to be for a blessing. Let's say, amen. I'll ask you to rise in body or spirit as we conclude our time together this morning with the memorial. El Malirachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamitzei Minucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Shechina V'malot Kedoshim Udorim Kezohar Aki Amazirim Et Nishmat Zelik Shub Shalach Lo Amo B'Gan Eden Minuchato Hana Ba'al Rachamim Astirehu B'Setek Knafecha La'olamim Utzro Yitzro Chaim Et Nishmato Adonai Udachalato V'yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkacho V'nomar Amen. Join me in the English. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Zelik Shub, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal embrace, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of lasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say, amen.
Please be seated. The interment is going to take place at Memorial Park Cemetery in Skokie. We're going to form a small funeral procession out on Big Tree Lane facing east. If you'll just pull out there, we will place a flag on top of your car. Please drive with your high beam headlights on and your flashers on. You are permitted to go through a red light if the light changes, but that doesn't mean that the people from the other sides are observing that there's a funeral procession coming through. So please drive defensively. If you stop, I'll see you in my rear view mirror. I will pull over and wait until the light changes. So please just be careful. There's only one major light, that's at Skokie Boulevard. After the interment, the family's returning to the residence of Arlen and Stacy Shub, 581 Silver Rock Lane in Buffalo Grove, immediately following the service and interment until 8 p.m. You can find that information in the service programs we've handed out. We're going to have the following as pallbearers. We're going to have the Stacy Shub, Courtney, Maya, and Aaron, 3 grandchildren, Jay Margolis, and Richard Horowitz. At this time, if everybody would please rise, and if the pallbearers would please come forward.
together. Just bring it up.